Welcome to the Glazing Guru podcast. My guest today is Matt MacRaild. Matt is a registered architect with the Cleveland Clinic and the founding partner of Focused Architects and Archi-Testing. Matt and I talked about how technology like virtual reality or digital fabrication is being used in architecture and construction. I had a great time chatting with Matt, and I hope you enjoy. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast or know someone that would make a great guest, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. And our sponsor today is myglassclass.com, the leading provider of online glass and glazing training and education. We all know the industry needs training, and myglassclass.com provides the most effective and easy platform to do it. Go to myglassclass.com for over 100 on-demand courses with wide-ranging topics, including curtain wall fabrication and installation and the basics of storefront and entrances. Produced by the National Glass Association, myglassclass.com has everything you need for glazers, fabricators, sales reps, even business owners. It also features Spanish courses and a glazer apprentice curriculum. Get started today with better training at myglassclass.com. So is the LLC that you started, is that Focused Architects?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
let's hop in.
Yeah,
let's
go
hop into
ahead.
that.
So that started off, like I said, I'd worked for a firm for I worked for a couple of firms while I was in grad school. I moved back to Cleveland, got married, had a couple kids, worked for a great firm here in Cleveland for probably about 11 years. And, learned a lot through that process. A lot of the things that I'll talk about, particularly, as we talk about glazing, as we talk about understanding of business, as we talk about kind of computation and what we can make with computers, I learned from them and I learned through the process there. But the great thing that I learned was also kind of the way to protect yourself. And so, sure, it may be your best friend from forever ago, but you still want a little bit of separation between you and getting sued and taking your house. And so I started this firm, really just as a business to ensure myself that something wasn't going to go wrong in the distant future, thinking that the relationship starts as a friend and takes a sour turn. And again, you screw up somebody's house, that's their house, that's their livelihood, that's their dreams that they've put into that. And so whether it's a design flaw, whether it's construction flaw, whether it's, just freak accidents that happen, right? That's why we have things like LLCs to protect everybody involved. So I was talking with a friend and they were like, listen, for $100, you can make sure that you're squared away. And so the most difficult thing was not pulling the trigger on that. It was actually deciding on what the name was going to be. Because when it comes down to it, we all know that whatever it turns into has to be thought through. You got to think, okay, well, what's the website going to be? How's that going to work? And so for me, Focused made a lot of sense. I love the idea of focus of, I love to focus in on a problem, because as an architect, that's a lot of what we do, right? Sure, I want a 6-bedroom house. I want one big restaurant, whatever it is. That's what the person comes to the table with. But you have to kind of focus in on what their goals are, right? A lot of times what we as designers do is we hear their program, I want a kitchen over here, I want this over here. But we have to help them focus on how to ensure that their workflow works. How is this going to work with your greater business, venture? How is this going to expand? What are the key principles that you're going to take from restaurant number 1 to restaurant number 17 as you continue to grow and become successful? So, as a designer, we think a lot about those types of things that a lot of people don't necessarily understand why we ask the question. At the fundamental roots, as designers, that's what we do, is we sit down, we focus on our clients, we focus on the concerns that our clients have, and then we focus on how we can bring value to that. And so all of those things kind of came together. And fortunately, knock on wood, nobody had focusedarchitects.com. And so that made it really easy, right? Everything kind of just streamlined into that. It felt right.
Yeah, I love the name. Couple comments about what you said. As far as a friend potentially suing you, I mean, it could even be that, listen, a friend should accept that. like, hey, yes, you're granted this level of protection just in case something happens, and it could not be them, it could be someone else down the line, right?
And
So
that's it, right? You know,
completely agree, completely agree with
it
that. Is do you have a second company,
so
Archi-Testing?
so I do. And so I during COVID, right? Nobody had a whole lot of stuff to do at the time, except sit around and think, right? As we talked about. I was teaching my son first grade math because everybody was home for COVID. My daughter was still in preschool, so I ended up teaching preschool colors and painting. And my daughter, who I love her to death, but she can't always 100% of the time get what you're saying the first time. And so, Dad, what are you doing? What are you sitting at the computer all day for? I said, well, I'm architecting. Oh, Jude, leave Dad alone. He's architecting. And she said it the first time, and I was like, that actually describes everything that I want to do with my life, right? I want to deal with space. I want to deal with creating and being creative. But what we do is we really test a lot of things, right? Architecture is a practice because nobody's got it, right? Everything continues to evolve. Technologies evolve. Practice evolves. The way that people construct and tectonics evolves. And to be on the cutting edge of that means that you're always pushing that envelope. And so when she said architecting, I was like, that's it, right? That's what I want to do. I want to learn how to change the perception and understanding of how we think about the space that we live in. And a lot of times, prior to drone technology, you would take a rendering, right? An architectural rendering from like bird's eye view. Nobody would ever see that. Well, now we've got the ability with drones to actually create that, right? To photograph those types of things. And so, I've always loved the idea of pushing the envelope and understanding how technology works for what we want to do, right?
Let's hop back to the VR real quick. So that's kind of
Yeah.
how you and I got the ball rolling to have a conversation here. Was a lot of it was based around technology. So with VR and AR, if you want to weigh in on that,
Sure.
where is the construction industry using these technologies positively?
So I will start with VR first, because virtual reality allows us to control everything, right? I can put you in a black box and I can control, as the designer, I can control what you see and how you see it, and what you hear and how you hear it. So as I'm designing your building, I can tell you that you can go through this door, you can't go through this door, right? I'm not going to show you the janitor's closet. I'm not going to show you the mops in the janitor's closet, but that atrium, that with that beautiful view, you can walk up the stairs, you can walk down the stairs, you can get all around that, which is really great for helping a client or helping a number of clients or end users understand the space that we're thinking as architects and construction workers, understanding how that works, what that's really supposed to look like. And then the virtual reality really helps with that because I can control everything, right? It's a black box.
You can create the space for the client to experience before they've made decisions.
Absolutely. And we can go through options. Do you like option A? Do you like option B? Right. And that's a click of a mouse, right? And that in the way that the design workflow works, we can do the exact same thing and it's no more effort, very little effort. We'll say minimal effort to go option A, option B. I can show you all of these different options that are in my head. If they're in my computer, I can show you in virtual reality in real time. So when you tell me, hey, I like this window over here, can you go ahead and move that window over here? In my computer, I can do that, move it, and then it takes about a second and a half and you see it moved, right? So you can actually start making real-time decisions based on what you think is going to be the case. Now, again, my mom, I love her to death. She can't see anything. So I had to be the guy who moved the furniture 7 times for my mom to understand. If we had virtual reality when I was, 17 or 18, it would have saved my back a ton of effort. So
sure. Yeah, no, I see that. So where would you say that the construction industry or the architecture community could be using virtual reality more? Where are we not using it?
So virtual reality is great for client interaction and to sell the project. Where we're not using it, where we could use it better, is actually coordination, right? Why wouldn't I take my general contractor through that exact same walkthrough that I'm taking my client? Why wouldn't I take, and again, all the information for those of us who use BIM and Revit and all of those sorts of models that we work so hard to ensure that everything is coordinated in the computer. Why wouldn't we walk through that? So my fire sprinkler guy sees his pipe has to go right here, because after he's out, we've got electricians who are running here. We've got ductwork who's running here. So when he decides he's going to move his pipe over 3.5 feet, well, now it's right in the middle of a duct, where a duct bank is supposed to go. And so now we've got coordination issues, right? There's the ability to use the technology to help us all understand and communicate better. And we do a great job in using that communication tool to sell. We do a terrible job in communicating how to actually coordinate.
Would you say that is possibly a responsibility of contractors, maybe being behind the use of technology to the architecture community?
I think that everything we do is a team-based environment. So I don't want to put the blame on any single person, right? If you've got a contractor, and I've worked with a lot of contractors who are pushing the envelope, they can tell the architect, hey, I want to see this in 3D. I want to see this in virtual reality. I mean, a virtual reality headset costs $250. I assure you that most projects could actually allow that to happen, right? So, a lot of it is really about as the process occurs, we are used to doing things that we have always done. It takes somebody to hit the brakes and go, hey, why are we doing this the way that we've always done? The technology is out there to help us understand better, quicker, faster, more completely. And whether that kind of break tap happens from a contractor, from a subcontractor, from an owner, or from an architect or an engineer, right? That's the important thing is that somebody hits the brakes, not who hits the brakes.
Fair enough. I think that's a great answer. You mentioned BIM in that conversation about VR just now. The two kind of, I guess, can play off of each other to a degree, right? But kind of the same question for design software. I guess it's kind of an easy question of where that's being used now, but maybe we could go ahead and jump to where could that be used better? Where could we use building software more efficiently?
So this is, you asked the tricky question, because it really depends. I have been in the industry long enough to know there are people that are still drawing by hand 30 some years after the first BIM technology, has come around, and they're very successful at it. Right. To me, it's not about what the technology is. It's about how you're conveying the information that is in here to the person who's actually installing and putting the equipment in, right? Whether that's a brick, whether that's, a machine, right? And we can talk about that later. But the idea of something as a designer, it's in my head and it has to get out. And so BIM is a great example, because now all of a sudden I'm able to put something in 3 dimensions, in virtual 3 dimensions, that my engineer can look at, and they can see I've got a steel beam here and I've got ductwork that has to go through here. And we can look and say very quickly, that can't actually happen. We understand the physics, that can't happen. So my alternatives are to go lower. My alternatives are to cut a hole in that beam. Like at that point, we can have a conversation about what the best way to do that is. But the point is that happens early. The time where that becomes terrible is when you've got a guy in the field holding 2 pieces up going, what do I do now? Right. I mean, the guy can only hold for so long before something falls. And so by taking those constraints and issues that didn't get caught when we were drawing in 2 dimensions and bringing them forward, now we're making educated decisions. So now it's not costing the owner more because, well, this is what I, as a contractor will say, this is what I had budgeted for. I didn't understand that this is what was going to happen. Now we're taking that out and we understand exactly where things are going and able to, and that's why the virtual reality concept walks right into this conversation, because I can now walk you through, this is where every, chase, this is where every pipe is going, every conduit is going here. You can see it in virtual reality before it ever occurs, right?
Yeah, I'm understanding now, talking to you, how the two are kind of tied together. So VR is almost like an extension of the design software. You can see it 3D on the paper with the design software, or on the computer, more likely. Now add VR, you can actually walk the project.
Yeah. Well, and then, so we talked, I think you hinted at AR, right? So
yes,
augmented reality takes that even further, right? So augmented reality is actually geared towards more the coordination side than it is towards the sales side, right? The virtual reality is easy because I control everything, right? I can show you, if we're in an empty warehouse, I can show you what it looks like in augmented reality. But if we're doing renovations and there's a wall right there, you can't walk in or walk through that wall. If we're going to open that wall up, you can't walk through that wall because you'll break your nose, right? So virtual reality allows you to do that. Augmented reality allows you to use what is there and then overlay. Think about it like a layer right. of trace. It allows you to lay something over top. So what that means is, in that conversation that we had earlier, where I've got a fire sprinkler that has to go right here, he can see the layer of the ductwork has to go here, the layer of the other conduit has to go over here. So he knows this is the lane that I've got an inch and a half on either side. So as the first guy in, he's not just putting his stuff wherever, because he knows he has to be a team player at that point.
So using that technology, you could essentially be standing on a job site and then almost lay the model over what you're looking at to see how it lays out.
Yeah. And yeah. I can lay that model as time progresses, right? Construction is not a on off. It's not binary, right? It's not no construction and then construction is done. We know that it's a process. And so I can turn on or turn off the steel. So when the steel is now up, I can turn off the steel layer and you see the real steel, and you still see where those conduits need to run. When those conduits get put in, you turn off that, kind of part of the model, you turn off that layer, if you will, and then you see where the door frames end up going or where the metal studs end up going, right? So it's really about building the building before it's actually being constructed, so that those types of conflicts, those types of potential issues that we all run into in the field, right? It's about taking them from 100,000 RFIs down to 10 RFIs.
So, okay, that's a good segue. I want to hop back to design software for one more thing.
Sure.
In terms of reducing work, I'm going to run this one by you that I've spoke about on previous podcasts, where somewhere within the design software, I'm of the opinion that more information needs to be loaded into it to reduce work. So from my perspective, from the glass and glazing niche, right, the subcontractor, those documents could have all of the information that I see people do 5, 6, 7, 8 times in terms of optimizing cut sheets, editing shop drawings, creating fabrication sheets where, like I said, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, these people are counting how much material, they're measuring how much material, they're coming up with what they need, with prices, with lead times. I'm of the opinion that all that information can be loaded into the design software, that it can be available in real time. So as you progress through that SD phase, DD phase, they can maintain accurate pricing and lead times to the second without having to redo shop drawings over and over again. Does that sound realistic to you, or am I living in a fantasy world?
The answer is both. No, so there's no reason that it can't, right?
Okay.
I mean, we have technology right now. I can, turn my vacuum on from 6 states away.
Right.
Why can't I go ahead and say, this is how long it's going to take for this piece of glass to get cut? It's about communication, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes we all live in our own silos. And that's what I'm suggesting technology has or offers us the opportunity to actually break out of, right? Imagine if your silo, and it has to be siloed because you guys deal with a whole lot more complicated stuff than I will ever know or begin to understand, right?
Well, as far as the subcontractor goes,
Oh, yeah.
Subcontractors always like to show that they know more about glass and glazing, but then I always bring up, yes, but you don't know much about the other. What are we up to? 39, 40 specification sections?
But that's okay, right? Like, I need somebody to ask me those types of questions, right?
It's correct.
So
I just didn't want.
I can't do it all.
Correct.
What I can do is I can tell you kind of what I want, and then put that in your swim lane, right? Like, all of a sudden it becomes your thing to own. And you say, okay, well, if we did it this way, it would be 36-week lead time. If we did this little thing, now all of a sudden it's 36-day lead time. All of a sudden now it becomes something that it's a communication device, right? And that's what we really struggle to do in our industry, right? Our industry is really about communication, even from the fact that what we do is draw, right? I take something that is going to be physically built and I talk about it and I draw it. And then you show me a drawing of what you're going to do. And then I mark up your drawing and then we get a thing, right? Like it's all about having that communication. And so 3D absolutely helps. Adding information to that 3D element absolutely helps. And so for me, it's about ensuring that what I'm thinking in my head and what you're thinking in your head actually align. And once those things align, then you can tell me how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, what the difficulties of that installation are going to be. And then we end up having a discussion about it, right? That's way easier to talk about before you cut a piece of glass and go, oh man, I didn't realize that you were doing this thing instead of this thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's it, right? It's just about communicating.
And I agree wholeheartedly. And the communication process, I think, for the most part, I think we do a decent job. It's just, I see these things where while we're doing that, we could add another layer and another layer. And instead of, okay, here's my drawing, right? And then Mr. Architect, and then Mr. Architect says, okay, I like it, but change this and this. And then from that point, you have to go 7 different places to find out what that change does to your price, to your lead time. And if you could just immediately, like, you change your drawing and you immediately have those answers because you're working with smart documents of some level, that's kind of where I am. There's another technology. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and that's if you're working on a simple project, right? I worked on a project in New York City where all of that stuff then had to go back through the city of New York to ensure that now all of a sudden we're hitting our, quotas for glass efficiencies and sustainability requirements and everything like that, right? So something that you and I may think is not a big deal, all of a sudden becomes a big deal in down the line, right? So it's about making sure that decisions we make, if we make a decision and it has some issue down the line, it throws up a red flag, goes, hey, you two in these 2 swim lanes make sense, but this guy way over here, he says, whoa, let's talk about this. And
ideally, the information that he needs is loaded into those changes as well. So as those changes are made, he sees, oh no, hey, that U value is no longer acceptable. And then you can go back and edit it. I mean, ideally what it might have been a 3-week process, you could probably get done in an afternoon if the data moved faster. Yeah.
I mean, an afternoon, I think is generous, right? It could be in 3 minutes, right? Depending on how that got communicated, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that to me is the critical element that is the reason that we're still kind of working the way that we worked 120 years ago, right? Because we're not capitalizing on the technology that's available to us to actually make our lives easier. We're using it to sell things a lot more. Yeah. We're using it to ensure that people understand what it is we're trying to do, but we're not actually helping ourselves all that much more, right?
Yeah. And, I would, if I'm going to go tinfoil hat lane, I would also say maybe there's a either conscious or subconscious level of self-preservation for some people, because as you streamline these processes, there's certain people that get cut out.
Yeah, but so I understand what you're saying, but I look at the history. I understand things through how things got to where they got to, right? And as I'm going to start with us as architects, we are not the best at understanding business and how business works, right? I've worked for a couple different firms in my life, and each one of those firm leaders learned how to lead their firm by the guy who they learned from, right? So it becomes this issue of, well, he learned from the guy that he learned from. So we're not actually looking at pushing technology forward. We're not, and there are some that are, right? But by and large, we're doing generally the same thing that was done 20 years ago. And that's, so I was having a conversation with somebody earlier. That's the really interesting thing about where we are in today's age. We have a whole generation of young designers who grew up with this type of technology inherently, right? Yeah. And so they don't have patience to wait 20 years to become named principal.
Yeah.
They're like, I can do this stuff. I can learn it, right? Like they grew up with Google. They didn't know what 2 + 2 was. They knew how to put it in Google and figure out what 2 + 2 was, right?
Absolutely.
And so the idea of shared knowledge has grown. And I think that has started to change how people think about the firms that they are using and that they're running. And it's one of the things that I think is really interesting about LinkedIn, right? Is that it has become kind of this opportunity for people to kind of open source how they think about business and how they think about their niche business. And so I think that's really the interesting elements that are occurring kind of at this moment right now in terms of technology, business, design, and all of those elements, right? Because the same thing happens within the industry, right? The mason knows how to run his business because he learned from the guy that he learned from, who had been a mason for 40 years, right? So that's the guy who's been running his own masonry company learned from a guy 40 years before. So that's 80 years in only 2 iterations, right? Think about those iteration loops. The more loops that I can kind of iterate through, the easier it becomes to make those small, subtle changes and see if they work or if they don't work.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only LinkedIn, but I mean, the platform we're using right now, Zoom, the amount of platforms that allow information sharing at such a high volume speaks to what you're saying in just a compounding fashion of how fast technology is moving. One more technology piece I wanted to pick your brain on: digital fabrication. So kind of the same question. What is that being used now? What are we doing with that now? And then what's something that we should be doing that we could be doing better?
I appreciate how you waited for the very end, so I couldn't go on rants and keep you up till midnight. So I do appreciate that you thought that one through. No, digital fabrication is again, it's about taking and communicating, right? Whether the concept is virtual and in AR or VR, or whether it's digitally fabricated, right? 3D printed, CNC milled, laser cut, water jet cut, it's about communicating information. It's just a matter of how that gets communicated. So again, one of the things, and I started to talk about this a little bit earlier, but kind of the 1900s Fordism, you made a widget, and for your 40 hours, 50 hours a week that you worked in a factory, you made that widget. You were the guy who was widget A guy.
Right. Widget A guy.
Yeah. Widget A guy. For as long as widget A needed to be made, you had a job. Well, all of a sudden, we now live in a situation where nobody needs you to make that widget. They need you to make something, but they don't need you to make that widget. They don't care if it's widget A or widget B or widget C, or if all of those widgets are different. And so I I have to give a little bit of credit, as much as it pains me, to Frank Gehry for helping the digital technology and digital fabrication into the architectural industry, right? Because he started making metal panels where he looked at it and goes, not all of those panels need to be the same, right? Every brick was the same because it was more efficient to make the same brick 10,000 times.
Sure.
You know, you get the standard brick. This is what it is. You get 10,000 of them. They're all the same. What can you do with this brick? Well, we don't have to do that anymore, because guess what? The computer doesn't care. If the computer is laser cutting or water jet cutting a piece of metal, it doesn't care if it cuts the same rectangle 1,000 times or 1,000 different rectangles, right? And so, you know, you start thinking about that in your world, right? The ability to translate that to glass and glazing. Sure. Well, now all of a sudden, not every piece of glass has to be the standard, you know, 4x8 or 5x10. Now all of a sudden it can be cut. It can be this, it can be that, right? It goes through the same process, but that finishing product becomes very, very different. And what that allows is flexibility in design without encouraging or discouraging any sort of restraint of that design, right? So I know whatever I have in my mind, as long as it fits within, you know, that maximum glass capacity by the glass manufacturer, we can cut this corner off, we can chamfer this, I can make a circle, I can make whatever. Sure, does it have waste? Does it, you know, is it the most efficient? Probably not. But can it happen? And does it need such a high premium? The answer is no, it doesn't, because I'm not asking somebody to get out there and chisel this thing out, you know, whether it's brick or glass or whatever, right? It's about ensuring that the design comes to fruition without adding additional cost or maximizing the additional cost that's necessary there. So for me, that's where the digital fabrication part of that comes into account, right? I can use a laser cutter, and my kids, my kindergartner 3D printed and laser cut something for Halloween, right? She laser cut a pumpkin, which that's crazy to me. I was in graduate school before they let me use a laser cutter. Apparently 5 is now the new age, but
right.
The ability that these kids, again, are learning how to use these digital fabrication tools at such a young age makes it really pretty critical, right? And means that that's what they're going to grow up with, right? So when now I say, well, I'm going to go buy this cell phone holder, right, that sits here at my desk. My son's like, why don't you just 3D print it? Okay, sure. Took me 45 minutes to design something, 3D print it, took me 2 hours. And now I've got something that sits there and holds my cell phone during calls like this, right? It's about understanding what the problem is, how we can creatively design it, create a solution. And then again, it's that iteration loop, right? If it works, great. If it doesn't work, it cost me an hour worth of time. It would have taken me that long just to go to the store and back.
Yeah,
so you keep testing that, you keep testing that, you keep testing that. And the thing that I love is that if we ingrain that in the kids now, the you know, like your kids, like my kids, by the time they get to college, that's to be expected, right? So whether they go into business, whether they go into medicine, it's about that design technology, right? As architects, as designers, that's what we have held our hat on, or hung our hat on, was the fact that we know how to solve problems. Well, if you start learning how to creatively solve problems as a kindergartner, and you keep that through all the way through 12th grade, it doesn't matter what you go into, that mentality is set. So
yeah, and skills like that, if we're going to say digital fabrication, or I've talked about this for coding too. I think children our age, by the time they're adults, those will be basic skills for every trade. A level of coding, a level of digital fabrication, just at least understanding of that. Kind of like how I'll say the people our age in the workforce, like there's just a general understanding of how to use Microsoft Excel, for just an easy example, right? I got to hop back to one thing you said, because any of my glass and glazing people have been cringing since you said it. A circle window. I know. People,
I assure you, I can make them cringe even more.
A circle window
with some of those things that I can create.
It's possible. It's possible, but it's very challenging for that circle window to control water correctly. That's all I got to get out there for that one. Something
But I didn't hear you say impossible.
No.
All right. So again, with enough time and money, anything is possible.
Hey, I have circle windows on projects that have been completed within the last 2 years. I mean, I was out looking at one the other day. It's possible. Anything is possible. I think Kevin Durant said that. One more item I want to pick your brain on. So something we talk about on the podcast often, or just in my travels all the time, is labor, finding labor. And we're not even talking finding skilled labor. We're talking finding bodies that can move. How can technology help us with the labor issue?
Well, so again, it depends on what you're looking for, right? I mean, we have robots, that can lay brick. I have no problem being able to create a design, again, through design technology, and allow that pattern. It doesn't even have to be the same, right? Again, going back to digital fabrication, that robot doesn't care if each brick is laid the same or if each brick is off by 1 degree. So after 90 bricks, now it's totally perpendicular to where that first brick was, right? And it will get it spot on every time. Computer doesn't care. So technology is there to allow that to happen. We talked about a little bit about drone technology. Why can't a drone pick up a brick and lay it exactly where it needs to be? Absolutely possible. Now, the question ends up being, how far into the future? I mean, Back to the Future was supposed to be like, what, 2015, right? So we're 7 years past, those Nikes that no longer need laces, and I'm still lacing up my
we have
shoes
hoverboards
here, so
though.
We do. But, so the question is, how far into the future is something like that? And honestly, I don't know. But is the technology there? Absolutely. Is the technology necessary? Probably not right now, because if it was, you would start to see that occurring, right? Again, as a fan of history, you start to look at how the US has started to bring people out of recessions, and it's always been through major infrastructural situations, right? The highway system was a great result of coming out of World War II, right? In the way that all worked. So being able to have bodies and being able to teach those bodies how to actually have a skill still has a lot of value to it. Now, I don't know that that's really being utilized to the best of its capability, but I think that we still need somebody to understand, right? I need to be able to communicate and have both the designer, the fabricator, the contractor, and the installer all be on the same page, right? So if it was just the installer that I had to take that circle window and put it in exactly where it needed to go, and then another robot come in and caulk it and ensure that circle window was never going to leak, absolutely. But I don't know that that's necessarily the most efficient use of the technologies that we have right now. But do I think that that's something that can happen in the future? Absolutely. I mean, you look at the 1800s, 1850s, we had technologies that revolutionized how we worked, how we thought about work. 1920s started, or 1910s started to do that as well. We're looking, the computer age started to do that. So every 50, 60 years, those things occur. It's just a matter of what's that next step going to be, and how do we change that?
Yeah, I would probably go that it's just levels of automation, similar to what you're currently seeing with vehicles, right? So everyone manually drove a stick shift, right? And then there was automatic transition, and now we're phasing into self-driving cars that still require a driver, right? And then someday, we're flying around in cars and we're sitting in the back seat, right? So the construction industry is probably just a slower version of that. So levels of automation along the way to, I don't know, I probably won't see this, but a fully automated construction crew type deal.
Well, and you got to realize, so this is where kind of that tinfoil hat comes back, and you can put that back on for a little bit, is that, once you do that, what is that guy who used to be the bricklayer, who used to be, the glazer, what do they do now? Right.
Sure.
And so we still want to help people,
Sure.
because sure, we're a business. Everything we do is a business, but it's a business based around people. And so we don't want to say, hey, Mr. Glazer, I appreciate your 39 years. And I know that 40th year would have been great, but sorry, like we still have hearts. We want people to be successful, and we want to repay the dedication that everybody has given us. Right.
Absolutely.
And so I think that that's a really critical element to this. Can we do it? Sure. Should we do it? Are we going to do it? Probably not.
I suppose the scale of output would have to justify, right? So let's say you had a crew of 10 glazers, right? And then adding these levels of automation, whether it's something to move the product, install the product, caulk that circle window, whatever it is going to make you not need 10. But if those 10 people all contribute in different ways, if they can use the machines, if they can work with the plans, the VR, the digital fabrication, there's opportunities which should allow us to scale, right? If we build 100 buildings a year, we should be able to build 200 buildings a year, or we should be able to build them in more efficient manners, right? So as long as that works, I think that those people that we're worried about still have a place in the industry. It's just they may be able to do a lot more with less.
And a lot differently, right? So sure. Again, we'll take the idea of digital fabrication, and I'll bring that back, right? I know a ton of woodworkers, great woodworkers. And you know what most of them do now? They run a CNC mill because they understand sure. how the wood actually works, how where things are going to crack. And so they can actually kind of check that and make sure that whatever they're going to do. And then they let the CNC mill, let the computer do what computers love to do. And that's calculate and just crank stuff out. So instead of this guy breathing in sawdust 8 hours a day, he hits a button, goes to get the coffee, and makes sure, checks in, make sure that thing is still doing what it's supposed to do 10 minutes later. And in those 10 minutes, he's working on another project and another project. So he's doing 4 projects in the time that normally it would take him to do a quarter of one project, right?
Absolutely. And you touched on a safety factor there of inhaling, right? So there's other trades that are lifting, glass and glazing, lifting 400-pound windows. Maybe they have a machine that can help them with that now. And fully automating that to like a Terminator movie, I think we're a very, very long way away from. But levels of automation, I think, is definitely within reach.
Yeah. And so I will tell you that the glazers that are listening to this podcast right now are going to work in a fundamentally different way than the glazers when your kids and my kids
absolutely
are going to be doing that, right? And so that's the transition that's going to occur. What is that transition going to be? I don't 100% know, but I can put some ideas out there because I understand where the technology is going and where people's mentalities are, right?
Yeah, for sure. Matt, did you want to add anything? Where can people find you? I mean, I'll throw your websites in on any post with this.
So I have zero dedication to my website or websites, because quite honestly, I just like to have communication. I like to talk to people. So, the best place is probably to find me on LinkedIn, like you did, John. You can check out, my couple other Instagram, pieces, but, really it's just find me on LinkedIn and let's have a conversation. I love learning. I love having conversations about what we do because, like we talked about here tonight, it's so different and it's so cool and we can't do it alone, right? 1900s architect was master builder. Now everybody is so specialized and it has to be a team. And so I love hearing from, glazers. I love hearing from contractors. I love hearing from virtual reality people. I love hearing from marketers, right? Like some of the conversations that we have make the industry so much better. So any way that we can have that conversation, I'm all about.
I greatly appreciate it, man. And circling back to one of the first things we talked about, just planning and people getting on the same page. as I've progressed through this podcast world here, I'm finding that having different people we have architect, we have contractor, we have subcontractor, we have installer. And if there's a way that we can get more people to come share their views in a forum like this, I think it can only help people. So greatly appreciate your time and your insights, man. Really enjoyed it.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you having me and putting up with my my last second audio here. So
I think the audio is just fine. You did great.
glad to hear it. So thanks again for having me. Looking forward to continuing the conversation through all of the various platforms and continuing to hear how great the podcast continues to grow.
We'll see. I'm not my expectations are low. My expectations are right above the floor.
Hey, and as long as you're there, you'll be fine. But no, seriously, I've seen everything that you've done, and I think that it's done a great job of continuing this type of conversation that we've talked about. So I appreciate you thinking about me and reaching out.
Of course, man. You have a great night.
Hey, you too. Thanks, John.
See you, Matt.
Yep.